All right, some exciting news, definitely exciting news for me, is to announce the Lightning Press OP4 Series. So I have those sitting here in front of me. This is just came out, I don't even think it's been 2 weeks, something like 10, 12 days ago. So we've got the OP4 Series out. Of course, the OP4 Series are the Smart Book. They come from the Smart Book series, the parent series. And those are from the Lightning Press. That is thelightningpress.com. So thelightningpress.com is, of course, the publisher, and that's, frankly, as I'll discuss later in this video, that's the best place for you to pick them up right now anyway. We'll discuss why. Typically a book, at least nonfiction writer that I am, will take anywhere, as quick as 2 years from the moment I start writing to the moment I release. It'll be anywhere from 2 years up to about 4 years. This has been an 11-year effort. This is like giving birth to an elephant or something. I mean, it's just, it's monumental. And I'm so excited here, honestly, just because I've been waiting for this day for a very long time. So the effort started way back in 2011. Way back in 2011, I went to Lieutenant Colonel Norm Wade. He was, I say retired, he wasn't retired at the time. And of course, he's the editor-in-chief at the Lightning Press. And so I went to him and I said, hey, I've got this great idea for this OP4 series book. We kicked around a couple of ideas. He said, yeah, start on it. So I started on what was then called, we were feeling out a title called Insurgent and Guerrilla Forces. So Tactics of Insurgent and Guerrilla Forces. But as we were going back and forth on that, frankly, Russia invaded Ukraine. That was building up and this whole mess. And so we pivoted very, very hard and said, Red Team Army, let's talk about Red Team Army, which again is nominally Soviet doctrine. It's certainly predicated on Soviet doctrine. And we said, hey man, let's get this stood up, let's do it. And we got that out in a really very, very short order. That was the fastest book we've ever put out. You see it here, OP4 3 Red Team Armies. We got the initial version out in 2 years, just lightning fast, no pun intended. Since then, it's already on its second edition. And we kept coming back to that insurgent, irregular forces. We kept coming back to that. But it was one thing after another. I mean, there was the drawdown in Afghanistan, and then the pandemic hit. That offered us the opportunity to catch up with new titles. And so that's when Norm said, hey, we're doing this collaboratively, let's make this much bigger. Let's include not just insurgent and guerrilla forces and the insurgent life cycle, but let's go beyond that. Let's talk about criminal elements. Let's talk about terrorism, crime cartels, and all these various non-state actors, militias and private security companies. We had to start putting them in, well, didn't have to, we just very much wanted to cover this comprehensively, the hybrid threat. And so it's very much irregular forces. So the good news is we got that done. But because of pandemic and the ongoing fight in Ukraine, we started to realize, okay, we need to diversify here. We need to diversify, and that came up with China. OP4 1 is Chinese forces, right? And closely related, but discrete, is OP4 2, which is North Korean forces. Okay, so very different structure, very different culture, and different ways of doing things, though obviously very much Red Team Armies. Today, Red Team Army, OP4 3, still goes by that title, but of course what we're expecting once Ukraine is settled, Norm has already told me, hey, after we get a proper Ukraine assessment, Red Team Army, since we're diversifying, will become Russian forces. Okay, the doctrine of Russian forces, we're going back to specifically that. Does it cover it right now in here? Absolutely. It's still predicated on Soviet and more modern day Russian forces. No question about it. But it tries to be more encompassing, where here we've broken it out. And finally, we're going to get to OP4 4, which is a future work, a future effort, will be Iranian forces. It's not all of the Red Team Armies. I mean, we have Venezuela and Cuba to cover, we have some African countries to cover, but it's the big players, China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And so you go, okay, that's how the OP4 fights, that's how the enemy fights, right? Wrong. Now we need the catch-all. We need OP4 5, irregular and hybrid threat. And so it winds up being this fantastic catch-all to say, okay, everything we haven't talked to you about state actors, doing, peer and near peer kind of fights. Let's also capture guerrilla warfare, insurgent life cycle. Let's talk about crime cartels and terrorist cells, different organizations, and how atypical or irregular forces fit into that. Talking about, again, militias and private security companies. And what's really interesting about that, let me say this, what's really interesting about the hybrid threat and the irregular forces is that they pair war makes strange bedfellows, right? You're the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they'll do that. All these various actors, non-state actors, will side with one of these red team armies or side with each other to fight against the other. They might be fighting against one of the red team armies. They might be fighting against one of the other non-state actors. But whatever the case is, it is all too often the case that U.S. forces and NATO forces have to enter into that fray. They enter into that theater of operations and wind up going, oh, wow, who's on our side, who's on their side? And so this is a critically important discussion. My effort here is I got the honor of collaborating with the Lightning Press for OP4 3 Red Team Armies and OP4 5 Irregular Hybrid Threat, but I don't want to dismiss the importance of the other books and the upcoming Iranian book. So they're all a series and they work together. Honestly, they do. Several different questions then. So why did we do this? The answer is, it's kind of multi-tiered, but the easiest answer is this. There has been no comprehensive effort by the U.S. Armed Forces since the United States Army's FM-100 series circa 1980 to 1982. FM-100, I think, 1-1-2-3. That's over 40 years ago that we saw what I would describe as a comprehensive effort. A comprehensive in breadth and depth. A comprehensive effort to say, okay, right now at this moment, here are our enemy forces. And they did that fairly well in the FM-100 series 40 plus years ago. But also to say, okay, here's a strategic look, here's an operational look, and here are the tactical considerations. Where we've seen pieces of that today, and frankly in the last 10, 12 years, we've seen some pretty good effort at describing the threat at a strategic look. And I would say the strategic look really kind of looks at a broad spectrum, so they do a good job of that. Operational look is very detailed, but it doesn't necessarily cover the entire spectrum. And the tactical exploration of this is, well, it doesn't exist. I mean, it's just woefully anemic, if there's any effort whatsoever. Anecdotally, the way I might describe that, sadly I could probably give a whole lot of, anecdotes about this, but let me say this. A colleague of mine reported that not that long ago, just a handful of years ago, when one of the Army's national training centers, the JRTC, JMRC, NTC, they were there. I'm not going to call out which ones because I don't want to offend anybody, but the point is that they went there and it was an insurgent guerrilla sort of scenario, this huge field training exercise at a national training center. National training centers are incredibly well funded and supposedly incredibly well researched and trained. And the OP4 insurgents were carrying around MREs. Now, if you know anything about guerrilla forces and the insurgent life cycle, you know why they certainly could do that. That's not outside the realm of the possibility to have field ration, day walking field rations, and so MRE as good as the next, right? But if you know about this life cycle and you know about the objectives of an insurgency, then you know they're never trying to separate themselves from their base of support. So that, the very idea of that is absolutely counterproductive to the insurgents' efforts, is to walk around with MREs. I know this sounds like such a small, nuanced thing, but it's critically important into understanding the fight that you have in front of you. And so if you have a make-believe insurgency that's behaving like Blue Force, you have a real problem in training and in learning. And so, again, that's pretty harsh, and sadly, that's not as harsh as we can get. So my point here is that the effort was to discuss in very authentic terms what OP4 should look like in these training centers and at the unit training. And we wanted to be able to give a reference and a resource that says, okay, here's how you build a very capable guerrilla force. Here's how you build a very low capable guerrilla force that's on the verge of a crime cartel or even working with a crime cartel to rip off the people and the populace. I mean, you can take this in so many different layers, and we wanted to be able to discuss that so that, again, training centers could say, all right, we understand that. That was the effort, was, hey, let's give them a great training tool. Well, that's kind of interesting because the effort since then has just ballooned, and so hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about that in a minute. But then that also says, so what is the scope? If this scope hasn't been attempted in 40 plus years, what's our scope? Our scope is to start with each one of these with a cultural primer, because these people are not making decisions like you, NATO and US troops, okay? Blue 4 troops. They have their own social culture, they have their own military culture, and that weighs in their decision making. How they solve problems often looks nothing like the way you and I solve problems. And so that's where we begin, is culture. Get it out of your head that this is going to look like a Blue 4. It won't. They'll have completely different solution sets. Then we go into, again, those strategic goals, those operational efforts, and each one of these have to bridge. And so from the operational efforts, we then bridge down to tactics. And when I say tactics, I mean all the way down to TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures, even getting down to battle drills where possible. We're actually able to define those. If you're able to do that, how authentic is this? Well, this is what was really cool. The Lightning Press has a reputation here in the SmartBook series of being true to doctrine, doctrinally sound. It's cited, it's referenced. If doctrine changes, the update will come through the SmartBook series, all right? So you know that, you've relied on it, and that's what's brilliant about it. So again, collaborating with Norm, there was a bit of convincing that I had to do, and yes, I am patting myself on the back, but there was a bit of convincing to say, hey, look, we're not going to find this completely, comprehensively inside of U.S. publications. And so with a head nod, a careful head nod, we started looking at more and more credible publications and resources, written resources outside of course, United States and NATO militaries, and then doing a bit of hermeneutics as much as we could to say, is this valid? Is this true? And so kudos to the Lightning Press for doing this and saying, okay, let's go open source. Let's look outside of U.S. doctrine. So that's one thing that I'll say right away. The authenticity is going to be ratcheted way up. Anecdotally, let me point out a couple things that, we expected this to sell to the schoolhouses, and in fact they are. We find that they're being picked up far more, however, by individual soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen. But frankly, the most telling for us over the last, a very brief period of time, but nonetheless, is that the intelligence community is actually who's sucking these up. And that's fantastic. That's real flattering. It says, yeah, you're doing your work right. These are valid sources that you're, open sources admittedly, but valid sources nonetheless. I would say then, the feedback I've gotten so far is that Russian infantry veteran, and he was wounded in the Second Chechen War, circa 2001, so it's been a minute. But nonetheless, his comment to me, and I'll quote him, but it's not an exact quote, but it's pretty darn close. He actually called me and asked me which unit I served in the Russian Army, not understanding. He was a bit confused. And so he calls me up and he says, yeah, which unit did you serve in? And I said, I didn't. Here's my sources. And he said, wow, because this was so spot on. He said, that's actually what we trained on in the Russian Army. He said, you've called this perfectly. And then he went on to belabor the fact he's living in America at this time. And he went on to say, look, I actually got to go to a private company that was offering Russian tactical doctrine. And he said, so he attended this, I don't know what it was, a 3 or 4 day course. It's a crash course. And he said it was run, the instructors anyway, were 3 Marine infantry, U.S. Marine infantry. And he said, he's like, it was good information. It was, as eye-opener, and he enjoyed the training, he said, but it was like the Twilight Zone. He said, I don't know if that was Russian doctrine from the 1940s or 50s or 60s, but he said, I can tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't Russian doctrine from the 1990s. And so said, okay, this is really good. It tells us we're on the right track, even if we know that we have to continually update that. And surely the fight in Ukraine right now is going to inform this book, and we're going to have to update it again, as all of the Smart Book series continue to do. So that's a good thing. Finally, looking through the news journalism reporting, we are seeing descriptions of our methods play out in the news journalism, and that's pretty important to us because, as you'll see in OP4 journalism actually is one of the trifecta, investigative and intelligence communities and journalism all offer perspectives on the irregular hybrid threat. And so the fact that we're seeing validation and even some vindication through journalistic reporting, which I'm not going to go in great detail here, but nonetheless, the fact that we're seeing that, this is very rewarding. So that's what we have coming for you. I'm very proud to be part of this effort. I will say this to my viewing audience: look for more and more of my videos, at least this fall, if not well into the winter, to cover the OP4 spectrum. I'm going to be talking more and more about that in my videos, getting away from the blue 4 spectrum so much. Again, if you want to purchase these, I would recommend doing it through thelightningpress.com. They are available in both hard copy and ebook. And here's the thing, the Lightning Press can actually bundle these for you. You can bundle them and mix and match them, whatever you want, and you'll get a better price on them that way. That's why I would recommend to my viewing audience, go through the Lightning Press. All right, guys, look for more of this. Thanks for being with me to celebrate. Now I'm going to go get a beer. All right, thanks. Bye.